For 1,000 years, slight exaggeration, 10 and more, federal government's been messing around with expropriation at the airport in Vancouver for a runway on which millions have been spent and which now will not be built. Brian, Coxford.
Jack, I'm standing on what used to be a driveway, one of 57 like this on the roads around this community. And this used to be a full-fledged community up until 7 years ago. It was about that time that the federal government moved with expropriation procedures, and 56 houses went under the bulldozer. People moved out. And what caused that? The third runway controversy that still rages at the Vancouver airport. 56 families are gone, but one remains. Hidden in the undergrowth, one family still fighting the federal government. It all started about 10 years ago, the thoughts about future expansion of Vancouver Airport. The expansion the bureaucrats had in mind was a third runway, and as the airport master plan of recent years read, it was to be designed in a way to promote the harmonious coexistence of the airport with neighboring communities. But a harmonious coexistence it was not going to be for the people of these Sea Island homes, because to facilitate a third runway, 57 homes on the northeast part of Sea Island had to go. And the federal government began the lengthy expropriation procedure. At first, the residents called foul. There were protests in front of the Ministry of Transport offices. They claimed the Expropriation Act was unfair. They weren't going to get enough money for their homes, and most of them didn't want to move in the first place. Step number 12 in the Expropriation Act called for a series of public hearings on the matter. And the lawyer of the day, who represented most of those people, didn't like it a bit, the way the federal government was bulldozing ahead.
All of the worst traits of the big D developers are utilized by the federal government. And then in addition to that, they use their taking powers. Their technocrats are concerned with getting on with building their project, whether it's a bridge, as you know, was indicated last week by the awarding of the contract for bridge construction. They're concerned only with getting on and building their thing. They're not concerned with the people and the total destruction of a community, whether it be here or whether it be St. Scholastique or whether it be Pickering, Ontario.
But despite the protests, the mistrust of federal officials, the homes were boarded up, a school attended by young children was torn down, and for lawyer Charles Johnstone, the fight goes on.
We've been hearing about airport expansion, the third runway, goes back 10 years at least.
The discussion started in about 1968-69, specifically heated up, and legal steps and the procedures and all of these matters started to be exercised in 1972.
Okay, expropriation, at least the process started in 72, and...
It started in 1972.
57 families?
57 plus, about that number.
You represented those families?
Yes, that's correct.
They're all settled?
They're all settled.
Except?
Mr. and Mrs. Jackson.
And this is Eveline and George Jackson, the only family of the 57 originals left from the expropriation hassle of 1972. And they're still fighting. How long are you going to stay here?
Just as long as until we get a proper settlement, or until they carry us out onto the road. If they want to do that, well, that's it. But I wouldn't walk out under my own power.
You're determined to fight for a principle here to get your fair share.
It takes the rest of my life. Yes.
Well, the reason that they haven't settled is because they were put into the position where they were, in effect, being forced outside the protection that the law was put to protect. This is the expropriation.
They signed an agreement outside of the entire expropriation agreement. In other words, they didn't follow the process.
That's correct, yeah. They were persuaded or induced or invade or they did make a deal.
So here we have 7 years later, everybody's settled, all the houses have been bulldozed over with the exception of the Jacksons.
Oh yes, they're gone, they've been removed. It's Elliott's wasteland over in the north end of Sea Island now.
What have they been paid?
Well, they were paid back in 1972. They were paid a total of $49,000, and that represented payment for their own house and the lot that it was on, and as well an additional lot adjoining that one. And the values that were established were $12,000 for the lot. So if that's taken out, they were paid $37,000 for their house and the lot that it was on.
Now, they signed a deed outside of the entire process of expropriation and got $37,000 approximately for that lot.
And that house.
What about the neighbors? The Jacksons got, as you mentioned, just for the house and the property, about $37,000. What about their neighbors who waited just another couple of months to go through the negotiation procedures of the Expropriation Act?
Well,
what did they get?
The others, eventually there were settlements that, in our view, would have justified in payment of an additional $23,000 to $37,000 to the Jacksons.
So that's the amount you're arguing that the Jacksons are entitled to?
Somewhere within that range is the sum that they ought to receive. That's the view.
The Jacksons originally signed over the deed for their home and property for about $37,000. The federal officials told them then they shouldn't wait until the expropriation procedures finished because they'd get the same amount of money anyway. Not true. 3 months later, their neighbors signed a deal that eventually gave them a better price. This neighbor picked up $60,700. The neighbor on the other side of the Jacksons was paid $57,900, and a third neighbor, this one directly across the street, received $49,000, $12,000 more than the Jacksons. Here's what happened. The Expropriation Act and its many steps are laid out to protect the homeowner. The first 11 procedural moves include setting up the machinery, informing everyone concerned of the federal government's intentions to expropriate. Step 12 in March of 1972 was when the public hearings were held, when most of the questions were to be answered. It was at this point that the federal officials persuaded the Jacksons to sign over their property for a lesser amount of money, while the majority of the other residents carried through with the expropriation steps to sign a deal that months later at the negotiation stage yielded them more money than the Jacksons. The Jacksons feel they're entitled to the same protection the act afforded their neighbors and have been fighting this principle for 7 years. It's the second time they've been expropriated by the federal government because of airport expansion schemes, the first time in 1954. Back in 1954, when the airport was originally set up and built, you were expropriated from the property you had then, and you came here to live.
That's right, yeah.
What did the people who expropriated you then tell you about this place? Did they say that there was any possibility that would happen again?
Well, there wouldn't be any property expropriated north of the Ferguson Road in the foreseeable future, is what they told us then. Yeah.
So you must have felt that your life was secure here. You wouldn't have any more hassles with this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right.
I believe it was September 12th, 1972, a fairly eventful day as far as the Jackson family is concerned. What happened there?
It was a disaster. Our place, our property was appraised, and my husband came home on strike all the same day, and it was just a really bad day.
On strike? Where did you work, George?
Hunting Merit Shingle Mill in Marpole.
Oh, that was the strike that lasted 4 years.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we didn't know at that time it was going to last any length of time like that, no.
Well, we weren't actually expropriated, you see. We settled. We got the papers that the expropriated people got, but that was after we had settled, and they had come around and told us that we would get the same on expropriation, or get the same now if we settled at this time than as we would get on expropriation, which unfortunately we believed.
So let's just get this straight. What they did is, in the midst of the expropriation procedures that involved 57 different residents on this property, they came around and said, sign here because you're going to get the same amount now as you'll get later.
Yes, they said that these were the final revised prices, and there would be no more increases. So there didn't seem to us to be any point in waiting. I mean, what's the difference whether you settle now or later if the money is the same.
Now, what was the end result? Your neighbors got a heck of a lot more than you did.
Yes, I don't know quite how how to explain that, except that they had to fight for it.
So here it is. It's 7 years later. The hunting and merit strike has been over for 3 years. It lasted 4. George, you're retired now.
Oh, yeah.
You've got another residence on the island, plus this one. What are you still here for?
Well, we're still trying to make a settlement with the government that we got, well, be treated the same as the rest of the people were treated here.
We feel we...
See, we got about 47.5% less than the rest got.
And you're entitled to your fair share. You
We're
feel
entitled to our fair
gypped,
share.
eh?
Sure, our property's worth as much as theirs.
Is it the money or the principle?
Well,
there's
it started with the money, and now it's the principle. Money now, well, at my age, it really don't matter that much now. We can get by without it. But at the time, it was, I guess it was money at the time, yeah.
There's the Department of Transport, the Department of Public Works, the Department of Justice, the Department of the Environment. The players change, the departments carry on. People come, people go, you go through different courts. The proceedings have been through the court of the federal court, trial division, the federal court of appeal. The matter is now set, inscribed in the Supreme Court of Canada, and it will be heard later this month. And at that time, the matter that is going to be raised in front of the court is going to be the question of whether, in terms of dealing with these people, the manner in which they were dealt with by the Crown, in our view, is one which infringed their rights under the Bill of Rights. That is, their right to the protection of the Expropriation Act, which was the procedure that was set down by Parliament to be used in these circumstances, not an ad hoc procedure which was created.
Over this whole process, 7 years of going to court, heck, you've been to numerous courts, you must have had at least upwards of 6, 7 lawyers on the justice side.
Yes.
And yet you're asking for about $23,000 to $36,000 more. Surely to goodness, the Justice Department has spent several times that amount just in legal fees.
I'm sure 2 or 3 times that, and I'm sure on behalf of the Jacksons that the legal fees that would be incurred would be substantially in excess of that.
What does this say to you about the whole system?
Well, it says that a citizen is at such a tremendous disadvantage when he's seeking to oppose the bureaucracy and the Crown that almost inevitably he's not going to be able to pursue his proper course.
And you go to the Supreme Court about the 25th of this month?
Yes, but whether in fact, whether in fact it gets there, that's another matter, because we now have the latest step in the bureaucracy, which is now an attempt by the Crown, by application, to seek to have the matter terminated on a very limited procedural point by the Supreme Court, by allowing the appeal on a limited procedural point, the effect of which will be to send the whole thing back again to begin again, and to start and to have 2 sets of proceedings commence.
And we might look forward to 7 more years of court time.
7 more years. Okay. Mr. Jackson's 69 at this time.
I think it's a ridiculous waste of time and money, everybody's. There's no, to me it's so pointless.